But first, I had an interesting conversation this week with a couple who voted Liberal in the April election, and they were complaining about the proposed cut to the civil service. And I glibly said, well, that's what you voted for. Then a moment later, I actually apologized and said that was unfair because cutting the civil service by 15% over the next 4 years wasn't discussed in the federal election. I mean, that's 80 to 90,000 job losses. But it did start a conversation about what, in fact, did 8.6 million Canadians who voted Liberal actually vote for. Now, I'm hoping it was a little deeper and they simply didn't like Pierre Poilievre, which polls suggest played a significant role for millions of voters and is a testament to the effectiveness of the Liberal campaign. But surely the support was far more thoughtful than a vague statement like standing up to Trump when nobody specifically said what that actually meant. So far, the only practical response we've had to the Trump tariffs has been to force Canadians to pay an extra $20 billion more due to our retaliatory tariffs. And of course, it made no difference, by the way, in the trade negotiations. I'm not sure why forcing Canadians to pay an extra $20 billion on certain U.S. goods is considered standing up to Trump. And maybe we should at least have a few questions as to why we were the only Western nation to respond that way. Now, I assume Liberal voters had other issues they thought that were more important than, so for example, the myriad of statistics outlining Canada's dismal economic record over the last 10 years. I get they had issues they considered more important than the billions of tax dollars that the Auditor General found mismanaged, along with hundreds of cases of conflict of interest. They had issues they considered far more important than what the Liberals themselves called the out-of-control immigration temporary visa mismanagement. By the way, a new CMHC study came out this week that said that played the most significant role in creating the housing crisis, affordable rents, affordable housing in cities like Toronto and Vancouver. Obviously, the fact that 2 million Canadians visit food banks monthly or 9 million live in food insecurity was secondary to other issues for Liberal supporters. And it's obvious they're not worried about the attacks on free speech. In fact, many support it. The list is as long, though, of what they didn't support. So what did they? Well, was it really as simple as Mark Carney is the best man to stand up to Trump, whatever that meant? Because that one's unraveling pretty quickly with the backtrack on the digital service tax and the backtracking on the threat to double Canada's tariffs to 50% starting July 21st. That's after Trump doubled tariffs on our steel and aluminum. I mean, so far we have higher tariffs. And the Prime Minister himself is saying we can expect tariffs to be part of trade with the U.S. in the future. So what's the actual mandate? Well, it's clear that Liberal supporters voted to increase government spending at that time by about $130 billion. But there's more coming. Since the election, there's some other announcements that have added on to that figure. They don't seem to have a problem with a $92 billion deficit, $75 billion every year going after. I think it's fair to say Liberal supporters support the $2 billion in media subsidies, along with $150 million more per year for the CBC. That's on top of $1.4 billion they already receive. They also support the federal government's promise to institute an industrial carbon tax that will apply to large emitters in industry. They support the move to reduce the lowest federal income tax bracket from 15% to 14%, which the government has followed through on. The Liberals, well, it's actually along with the Conservatives, are looking to remove the GST on new homes valued under $1 million for first-time buyers. The Conservatives say it's $1.3 million for any buyer. But the Liberal mandate also includes the proposal to spend $5 billion to diversify trade corridors, $2 billion to fund support for businesses and workers affected by the American tariffs, and along with billions more for increased defense spending. So that gives us an idea of what we can expect. So that's what Liberal voters have to be held accountable for, policy-wise, and of course, along with the results.